Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update. Join the only official Telegram channel of RAU'S IAS Study Circle to get relevant material and important updates. Hello everyone and welcome to Daily News Simplified, your one-stop solution to detailed analysis of current affairs which are published in the Delhi edition of Hindu newspaper. Articles dated 10th of August 2021 are listed on your screen, and the timestamping for these articles is already given in the description box. So let us begin with the first article itself. So the first article for today's DNS discussion is related to an important report published by IPCC on climate change. Well, this is the sixth report of IPCC on climate change. Well, there are three articles published in different pages, being your page 1, page 6 and page 8. We have combined all these three articles in order to make a single comprehensive article and discussion. So these three articles will be covered today. Apart from these three articles, we will also look into the background of this report of the IPCC, highlights of the report, basics about the climate change, reasons of limited success when it comes to the fight against climate change, impact of climate change on human, environment and of course flora and fauna, India's risk factor on climate change, and ultimately we will also talk about some of the measures which were taken by India in order to deal with the climate change. But before venturing into the discussion itself, let us also look into how far UPSC is favoring the climate change as topic. We'll start with the prelims first. Well, from prelims perspective, UPSC has been very consistent. They have asked questions indirectly and directly related to the climate change and its various aspects. As you can see, in 2010, they have asked questions related to UNFCCC, which is an international convention to fight against the climate change. They've asked a simple question about a treaty on which it is based. In 2017, they have asked a question related to the international organization which is working in the field of climate change. And similarly, in 2018, they have asked a simple initiative of international level, and they have just listed down the international organizations which may or may not be associated with this initiative. So going by these questions, it is clearly visible that UPSC may frame a question this year also, because this year the IPCC has published the sixth report which has clearly and explicitly mentioned that the current initiative of the global community is not at all sufficient in order to restrict the global climate change below 1.5 degrees and ultimately below 2 degrees Celsius at global average. Now, why we are targeting these two figures? Well, the reason being the Paris climate deal. In this climate deal, the global community came towards a single platform and decided what to do after the Kyoto Protocol. In that manner, what they have done, they have brought a dedicated initiative which each country should follow in order to fight their climate change, and globally, every nation should put in effort in order to fight against the climate change. Given this thing, climate change and its related aspects are very important from your prelims perspective. But now the question arises, what about the mains? When it comes to the mains examination, UPSC has asked question not only from the perspective of environment and pollution, which is already explicitly mentioned in your General Studies paper 3, but climate change can also be asked from questions related to science and technologies, achievements by Indians in the field of science and technology, awareness in the fields of nanotechnology, biotechnology, and of course the IPR, because transfer of technology is part of your climate change. Similarly, climate change is also responsible for disasters. Take the case of recent floods in Madhya Pradesh. So because of all these relevance, do not try to limit your knowledge just to the environment and its impact. The climate change is suitable in all these topics of your General Studies paper 3. Now the question arises that what UPSC has asked previously. Take the case of 2020. In 2020, they have asked questions related to environment impact assessment, which is already mentioned in the syllabus, as you can see here directly. Similarly, they have asked a question related to government initiative in order to control the pollution, because pollution is also mentioned in the syllabus. Similarly, they have asked questions in 17, 14 and time and again in many other papers. The one thing which you need to keep in mind is that UPSC may repeat the topics on which they have already asked a question. As you can see, they have asked the question on EIA in 2014 and they have repeated the same topic and same theme in 2020. So you can expect a question on climate change this year as well. And because of that, this article becomes extremely important. Now let us venture into the article. The article actually talks about a sixth assessment report of Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This report is actually focusing on the working group 1 of the organization, which is focusing on physical science basis. This report also targets impact, adaptation, and vulnerabilities. And finally, it also targets the mitigation efforts at local and global level. Before venturing into the detailed analysis of the climate change, we should have some basic ideas about different organizations mentioned in different articles. The first one being your IPCC, which is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It is an initiative which was made by World Meteorological Organization and United Nations Environment Program. It began its functioning in 1988 and the objective was straightforward: assessment of what? Science related to climate change and its impact. They also predict the future potential problem of the climate change, and lastly, they also provide possible adaptation and mitigation way forwards. Because of this, IPCC has become one of the most authentic report developer when it comes to the climate change. And because of this, we are discussing this report in length and breadth. Apart from IPCC, World Meteorological Organization is an intergovernmental organization and a specialized agency of United Nations. The objective is straightforward. It is working for the meteorology, that is weather and climate situation, operational hydrology and related geophysical sciences. It was established after the WMO convention in 1950. Similarly, UNEP or United Nations Environment Program was a result of United Nations Conference on Human Environment, which is popularly known as Stockholm Conference in June 1972. Well, these are factual information, so all these three boxes are useful for your prelims fact sheet. Given these important facts in place, now let us see what report is actually talking about. The report, which was titled as Climate Change 2021, the Physical Science Basis. So based on this report, what we will observe is what is happening with respect to India. Because UPSC's target will always be towards the macro and the micro issues of India. However, peripherally, they will also be asking questions related to the global problems. So as per this report, Indian Ocean is warming at a higher rate. Why? Because there is a greenhouse gas emission across the globe which is trapping more heat than what it can release. And because of this warming of the Indian Ocean, what we are observing is that there is a high frequency of heat waves, especially in the northern plains of India. And similarly, we are having frequent flooding during the monsoon season, both in South and in North India. The best example being the case of urban flooding, which we have seen in Mumbai, Hyderabad, and in fact Chennai. The second observation of the report talks about irreversible climate change. Now, what this has done? This has actually increased the annual mean precipitation of India. As you must have observed these days that the frequency of rainfall has reduced, however the intensity and the downpour of the water has increased considerably. And because of that, what we are observing is that there is lengthening of the monsoon. Now, what happened previously that there was very minimum rainfall in the month of March and April. But this year, this trend was actually reversed. And what we have observed is that there was a higher than average rainfall in these 2 months. That simply means that India is now receiving more rainfall than ever because of the irreversible climate change. The third observation of the report talks about the rising sea level. Why sea level is rising? Because there is melting of glaciers. Glaciers in around the Himalayan and Tibetan regions, glaciers in and around the other mountain chains including your Andes, and of course the melting of glaciers in North and South Pole. And because of that, the run of the river is high, water discharge in the ocean is ultimately higher, and because of that there is a rise in the sea level. The another reason for rising in the sea level is rising in the global heat. So when there is more global heat, water actually expands, it rises up and also causes a sudden rise in the sea level. Because of these two reasons, the coastal areas are prone to flooding. As we have seen in the case of Mumbai, where a combined effect of high tide and heavy rainfall causes flooding. The submergence of the coastal cities like Mumbai and Chennai may create a human disaster in the near future, as per the report. And lastly, it also talks about the melting of the glaciers. The report actually talks about an important area of Hindu Kush Himalayan region. The report says the western part of Himalayan region is more prone to the climate change. The report also says that the Karakoram region and if in fact the western part of the greater Himalayas are not as much impacted due to the climate change. So because of this melting of glaciers, there is flooding in the plains and continuous shifting of the river channels. The best example being the case of Bihar floods, where rivers are so notorious that they have shifted their channel regularly and destroy the agricultural field to an extent. Now, after discussing the highlights of this report, let us now discuss some basics about the climate change. Now, the globally accepted definition of climate change says that it is a periodic modification of Earth's climate brought due to a change in the atmosphere as well as an interaction between the atmosphere and various other geological, chemical, biological, and geographical factors within the Earth system. Now, it simply proves that the current phase of climate change is not the first one. Earth has been through the multiple phases of climate change in the past. We have seen that there was ice age multiple times, there were droughts multiple times, there was very high temperature when Earth was building up, there were volcanic eruptions across the globe, vegetation was at its lowest position, and all this proves that climate change is not something new to the Earth. But the point is, this time we as a human are more responsible for the climate change. Now, the factors which are affecting the climate change are as follows. First being your natural factor, which have been historically the most notorious reason for the climate change on this planet. The first being changing physiology of Earth. Now, it means that because of the rising of the mountains, changing of the ocean currents, continental drift and whatnot, Earth has been through the different phases of climate change. Take for instance, Indian subcontinent was not originally part of Asia, but when it marched towards the Asian continent, there was a rise of Himalayan region. Before that, there was no Himalaya. And because there was no Himalaya, there was no ice glaciers. So rising of ice glaciers because of the mountain also brought a regional changes in the climate of South Asia. Similarly, we have reasons of volcanism. Volcanism is an activity of releasing of molten lava over the earth. And because of that, there is release of various gases, including your carbon dioxide, which ultimately increases the temperature of the earth because of trapping of sun's radiation. And lastly, we have the change in the carbon sink. When Earth was going through the transformation, there was no vegetation over it. However, with the course of time, there was a rise in the vegetation, there was expansion in the vegetation, there was expansion in the oceans, and ultimately there was change in this carbon sink. Carbon sink here also denotes the natural carbon sink, which is done through vegetation and oceans and other water bodies. Both of these act as a reservoir of carbon. So whenever there is natural change in the quantity of these two important aspects, there is change in the climate as well. However, the current aspect of climate change is more anthropogenic, which is based on the human factor. The first reason under anthropogenic is greenhouse gases, and the most important one being CO2 and methane. These gases actually permit the sunlight to absorb the heat radiation. These greenhouse gases are not bad until and unless they are at the right amount, because they help in keeping the Earth's average temperature close to 14 degrees. And without the natural greenhouse gas effect, the Earth's temperature could have been close to minus 19 to minus 20 degrees Celsius, which is not suitable for the survival of the flora and fauna. And because of that, we require greenhouse gases. But as the human activity has increased due to the onset of industrial revolution, the emission of greenhouse gases has also increased to a much more extent. As these gases are also responsible for absorbing and retaining the heat coming from the sun, they are causing the global rise in the temperature. The next reason being your atmospheric aerosol. Well, there are two types of aerosol, one being your natural and the other being your anthropogenic. The natural aerosol actually include the wind-blown material such as dust in semi-arid and arid regions. They also include particles from the volcanic eruptions and in fact burning of the forest in a natural format. But the real issue is your anthropogenic aerosols. These have been increasing due to the human activity. The best example being ammonia, which is also used in fertilizer sector. Similarly, we have nitrate-based aerosols which are coming from the burning of plants and other organic material. The best example being the stubble burning during the winters in North India. And lastly, we have changing the land use pattern in India. See, cutting down of the trees for the forest has reduced the carbon sink or the natural carbon sink available. We have replaced the dense forest with the annually growing crops which have lesser amount of carbon absorption, and they also does not provide the enough amount of oxygens for the survival of other beings on this planet. And because of the changing in the land use pattern, what we are observing is that there is a fall in the natural carbon sink across the globe. Now, based on these important factors, globally the temperature is on the rise. And this rising of the temperature has not been limited by the global community because of the following reasons. Now, these are the important reasons because of which climate change has become a more important and severe issue than the ongoing pandemic. Now, the point is why we are not able to fight the climate change as we are supposed to. The reason being the global leaders are only talking about climate change and they are not working on the mitigation and adaptation efforts as such as they are talking on to. Similarly, the Paris climate deal has remained largely on paper. The on-ground efforts taken on the basis of the climate deal is not substantial. We also have limited efforts when it comes to the transfer of technologies from developed nations like US, European nations to the less developing nations, including your island nations. There is a trust deficit between the industrialized or the existing industrialized nations and the emerging industrializations about the responsibility. That who is actually responsible for the ongoing issue of climate change. Industrialized nations are not at all taking the full responsibility and they want the developing nations or the emerging industrial nations like India to take their own effort in order to find a better responsibility towards the climate change. We also have funding related issues towards the climate change because the ongoing Green Climate Fund is very low on its funding measures. The requirement of $100 billion has not at all been achieved by now. Similarly, the research and development on climate change is regionally biased. So there is a high level of technological development, high level of funding towards the climate change in developed nations, and it is very limited on third and fourth world countries. We have conflict between the economic development and climate change. And unfortunately, this is not only limited to the developed nation. This is also applicable to each and every nation across the globe. The most affected nations due to climate change, that is the islands of the Pacific Oceans, have very least power to express their concern on the international platform. They always try to find bigger powers, including India, in order to represent their views on the international platform. We are also going through the poor follow-up on polluter pay principle because as developed countries are historically more polluting in nature and of course even in the current scenario they are very high on polluting measures. United States and European nations are among the top emitters of CO2 and despite that they are not among the top contributors on fund, technology transfer and capacity building. And lastly, the green technology which we all are talking about is itself very expensive to adopt. And because of this reason, many poor countries are not capable in order to expand their green footprint and control the climate change. Given all this situation, now we should move towards what are the actual consequences of climate change which we are going through across the globe. Now these are the basic impacts of climate change. They are not subjected to a particular country, they are global in nature. The first one being, of course, the higher temperature. Because of the climate change, the global temperature across the world is increasing. In fact, the 5 hottest years on record have all occurred since 1997 and the 10 hottest since 1990. It means that in last 31 years, we have recorded over 10 hottest years since we have started recording the temperature at a global level. We are also going through the glacier retreat, which we have already discussed previously, that because of the rising temperature, glacier size is reducing across the globe, both at higher altitude, that is Himalayas and Andes, and also at the polar sites. We are also going through the changing landscape. So increasing temperatures and changing patterns of rain and snow have resulted in moving of trees and plants around the world towards polar regions and up mountain slopes. So now we can find more green landscape closer to the polar regions. Some of the species and communities such as polar bears and alpine meadows may be left without any remaining viable habitat and may put other wildlife at risk. We also have issues related to the ecosystem at risk. The rapidly changing climate is likely to exceed the ability of many species to migrate and adjust. And because of this, many experts have predicted that 1/4 of Earth's species will be headed towards the extinction by 2050. We also have the issue of ocean acidification because increasing concentration of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has also increased the absorption of CO2 in the ocean thanks to the carbon sink, but it has also reduced the pH and make the ocean more acidic. We are also observing that more acidic ocean would adversely affect the health of many marine organisms, including your planktons, mollusks, and other shellfishes. We have also seen a rising of the sea level. We have discussed this previously as well. We have also been observing the rising risk of drought, fire, and floods. Why? Because there is a rising temperature across the globe. Hence, this higher temperature has increased the amount of moisture that evaporates from land and water, leading to droughts in many areas. Similarly, a temperature rise at global level would increase the likelihood of forest fires. This climate change has also been causing threats of diseases at the global level. So, as the temperature increases, so do the risk of heat-related illness and even death of most vulnerable human population. The best example here being the death due to loo and heat strokes in India. And finally, we have issues of economic loss and food security. Some of the researchers at IPCC said that if no action is taken to curtail the global carbon emissions, climate change would at least cost 5 to 20% of the annual global gross domestic product. In comparison, it would take 1% of the GDP or even less to reduce the most damaging effect of the climate change. So if countries come together in order to contribute 1% of their GDP, we can at least reduce this risk of 20% reduction in their future GDP. Coming to the food security, well, climate change is projected to have significant impact on agriculture conditions, food supply, and food security. There may be a shift in the climate and agriculture zone towards the poles. There may be changes in the production pattern due to higher temperature. It may also boost the agriculture productivity due to increased CO2 in the atmosphere. But this productivity will definitely come with a price. So based on this analysis of the impact, let us see what specific issues are there when it comes to India. Now these are the important issue which is India specific. As per a new climate for peace initiative of G7 nations, the following are the issues which are faced by India. Well, the first one being your local resource competition. As the pressure on the natural resources increases, let's say water bodies, competition can lead to instability and even the violent conflicts in the absence of effective dispute resolution. We have seen this in the case of Gujarat and Maharashtra. We are also seeing in the case of river water disputes. It is also causing livelihood insecurity and migration of the people. Well, climate change will definitely increase the human insecurity of people who depends on natural resources for their livelihood, which could push them to migrate to turn into illegal source of income. The extremes of weather events and disaster are also becoming a norm in India now. Extreme weather events such as floods and droughts simultaneously have caused disaster like situations in the country. They have also increased the people's vulnerability and grievances, especially in the conflict affected situations. India is also going through the transboundary water management issues, especially in the case of Indus water and its tributary. We are also seeing the case of Brahmaputra and water sharing between India and Bangladesh on Ganga. India will also face the rise of sea level and the coastal degradation. India has already framed the coastal regulation zone, but these regulation zones are not effective until and unless we have concrete initiative on the global climate change. Because rising sea level will definitely deteriorate the coastal region and will impact the biodiversity, especially those plants and animals which cannot survive in the high saline water when submerged. India will also go through the volatile food prices and the provisions, because if we take the current case of flooding has damaged the food crop in many states of India, and because of this they have caused food insecurity. This food insecurity would ultimately lead to inflationary kind of situation, which ultimately damages the saving capability of the poor class. And lastly, India is also subjected to the unintended effect of climate policy. Let's say on the one side we are saying that India would reduce the CO2 emission, but this reduction in the CO2 emission will also reduce in the energy security of India. Because as of now, India is dependent heavily on coal or thermal based power energy supply. And when there is reduction in the coal supply in the country because of the climate change policy, we will have energy insecurity. So in order to avoid that, India would require more investment in the green technologies. So now we come to what India has actually done. Well, India has given the following initiatives. There are n number of initiatives which you can quote. In fact, you can also quote your local or state level initiative in order to fight the climate change. For instance, Uttar Pradesh has taken up mass campaign of afforestation. Similarly, Rajasthan is a state which has started initiatives on building a green belt in order to reduce the desertification. We have initiative in National Capital Territory of Delhi where they are focusing on green mobility and utilizing hydrogen based CNG transportation. So you can add all these initiatives in order to build a good answer for your examination. So let us look at these initiatives. India has started on National Action Plan on Climate Change. Under this, we have many sub-components which actually targets energy efficiency, green energies, sustainable habitat, water, Himalayan ecosystem, greening of India and whatnot. We also have National Clean Energy Fund, under which government has been financing and promoting the clean energy initiative and funding the research in the area of clean energy in the country. In order to raise money for this fund, government has actually implemented a separate cess on coal. And because of this cess, government has been able to generate money to finance green energy projects. India has also been signatory to the Paris Climate Deal, and based on that, India has targeted to reduce the energy intensity by 33 to 35% below its 2005 levels by 2030. India has also pledged to bring non-fossil fuel sources up to the blending of 40% to its total energy requirement. Similarly, India has also started an international solar alliance along with France in order to bring nations on single global platform to promote green energies. India has also recently started the Bharat Stage Emission Norm 6, which are equivalent to the European standards on the emission norms. India has also provided a clean energy cess, which we have discussed in the second point of Clean Energy Fund. India has started the National Afforestation Program. Few years back, government has started smart cities in order to reduce the pollution and emission of the greenhouse gases, where government has pledged to increase the green mobility across the smart cities. Government has started the Clean Ganga mission in order to reduce the pollution and emission of the aerosols in the environment. We have National Air Quality Scheme in order to reduce down the particulate matter which are responsible for trapping more heat. And lastly, government has also started electric mobility plan along with the FAME project in order to increase the electric mobility across the nation. As I said, you can add n other numbers of initiative in your answer if the question asks about the climate change. Now the point is, what should be the ideal way forward at the global level? The ideal way forward at the global level should be to implement and follow the Paris climate deal in letter and spirit. The second thing should be that there should be a global bank of technology where open source technology fighting the climate change could be provided to poor nations without any charges. Countries may also come together on an international platform in order to frame policy which are more country specific and does not require more amount of funding. These kind of initiatives will definitely help nations to build a common consensus to fight the climate change and achieve its goal before 2050. If not, the climate change at the current pace will become irreversible as per this report of IPCC. So given all these discussion in mind, you will be in a position to identify and write down all possible points when the question related to the climate change comes to your prelims or the mains examination. With this discussion in place, now let us move to the next article for the day. This article was published on page 9 of Delhi edition Hindu newspaper and talks about a recent controversy which arose in the state of Rajasthan, where some of the people actually demanded the extension and expansion of scheduled areas and their related panchayats. Well, scheduled areas and related panchayats are also recognized under the Constitution of India if you go through the 5th schedule of the Indian Constitution. However, this article becomes important for us from the prelims perspective with the cause of Constitution of India. From mains, it is important for the constitution, polity and governance. When it comes to the context of this article, it is straightforward and it says that some of the tribal outfits in Rajasthan has demanded the inclusion of 165 villages and their panchayats of 7 districts in the tribal sub-plan. Why? To facilitate the control of local communities over minor forest produce as well as the developmental activities. Now the question arises that what is this tribal sub-plan? Why these people are demanding this? That is, what are the basic benefits of this plan and how these plan can be utilized? Apart from this, the people on the International Day of World Indigenous People have asked that some of the panchayats in these areas have already crossed the scheduled tribe population above 50%, which means that they are now eligible to be declared as scheduled areas. So they are backing their demand on the basis of an important legislation which was passed in 1996 known as PESA Act, that is Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas. UPSC has already asked questions related to the panchayats both at the prelims as well as the mains examination. Given that thing in mind, this article becomes important for us to go in details. Now let us see what is a tribal subplan. The tribal subplan strategy was initially adopted and developed by an expert committee which was set up under the Ministry of Education and Social Welfare in the year 1972. And the chairman of this committee was S.C. Dubey for rapid socio-economic development of tribal areas, and later this plan was adopted in 5th 5-year plan. After the merger of plan and non-plan expenditure under the budget, the TSP or tribal subplan was renamed as Scheduled Tribe Components by Ministry of Finance. The financial grants given to these tribal subplans comes under the Article 275(1) by the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. So the nodal ministry of all the tribal affairs for tribal subplan is Ministry of Tribal Affairs. When it comes to the authority, well, state governments are supposed to earmark tribal subplan funds in proportion to scheduled tribe population as of now based on census 2011 in the state with respect to total state plan. So it means that state government, let's say, have a budget of 100 crore rupees. So they themselves, based on the scheduled tribe population, will determine that what amount should be allocated to these tribal subplans. When it comes to the monitoring, well, monitoring of these plans was being done by the Planning Commission till 2017, because Then 12th plan came to an end. However, as of now, it is under the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. The basic objective of this plan was to channelize and monitor the flow of outlets and benefits from the general sector in the central ministries and departments for the development of scheduled tribe, at least in proportion to their population. It simply means that scheduled tribe population in the country should be allocated the funds for which they are entitled. So if the scheduled tribe population, let's say, is 8% of total, so 8% of the funds under the budget should be allocated for them in order to go for socio-economic development. And for this, tribal sub-plan was created. An important note here is that tribal sub-plan scheme is not applicable to state and union territory where tribal population exceeds 60%, as the annual plan in these states is itself a tribal plan. So it simply means when the majority of the population is 60% or above, the annual plan or the plan which is executed by the state government automatically becomes the tribal plan instead of being a general plan. Coming to the benefits and the concerns of tribal plan, well, benefits are as follows. It provides for infrastructural development in those areas where tribal population is inhabiting. It also provides for livelihood opportunities such as collection of minor forest produce, their processing and their marketing. It also helps therefore in reducing the poverty and unemployment which is extremely high among the tribal population. It also provides for raising the nutrition level, because once livelihood opportunities are created, they have enough money in order to create the higher nutrition levels. So once they have money, they can also go for higher literacy and better health standards. Similarly, the money which they have in their hand will also enable them to go for higher sanitation standards, clean drinking water, and of course the housing. These things can also be done through the infrastructure development program. And that is the reason why they require a dedicated plan in order to execute all these policies. However, as of now, there are certain concerns. Public Account Committee, which is also part of the constitutional functioning, chaired by Malika Arjun Khagre, has submitted its report about the tribal sub-plan in December 2017. The committee actually noted several discrepancies in the implementation of TSP, which included non-adoption of specific norms for release of fund. Let's say there is a particular ministry which does not follow the rules mentioned about the distribution of the funds. The weak program management was there because there is lack of coordination between states and the center when it comes to the tribal population. There was deficit monitoring system because most of the tribal population does not have trust on the outsiders when it comes to the monitoring system. So what we require as of now is localized monitoring system where tribal people themselves can go for social auditing and can revert the report to the authorities. And lastly, there was non-implementation of information program. This is the most important thing. When tribal population does not have enough information in order to carry out their functioning, they do not know what kind of plan apply to them. It is not at all desirable on their part that they will come and hold the government accountable for the funding. So these are the important issues which was raised by this committee. But this committee also listed down some of the way forward, and the suggestions which were made by this committee are as follows. The first suggestion was categorizing the funds under separate head for clean demarcation. This is the important thing. To reduce the ambiguities, committee recommended that strict adherence of enmarking of fund into separate headings at each level, that is district, block, panchayat, should be made mandatory for releasing of fund. Simply it is calling for decentralization. It also talks for tracking of funds necessary, which means a more proactive approach needs to be taken up to keep track of monitoring, fund utilization and implementation of schemes for tribal development. It talks about non-lapsable pool of TSP funds. It means the committee observed that presently funds at the end of financial year were not being transferred into the non-lapsable pool of TSP fund that could be utilized later. Thus, committee recommended for optimum utilization of TSP funds and creation of non-lapsable pool to utilize unused fund in the previous year. Take for instance, in 2021, there were 100 crores which were allocated to the tribal area, However, only 80 crores could be utilized and the rest 20 crore were still lying in the accounts of the central government. Now, when a fund is lapsable, this 20 crore cannot be taken up. But when the fund is non-lapsable, this 20 crore will be added to the next year's account. Let's say the next year will be 100 crore. So the final allocation would be 120 crore for the tribal plan. The another suggestion forwarded by the committee was need for central nodal unit for review in order to reduce the discrepancy and remove any kind of misinformation on ground level. It also talks about the nodal units to be set up at state and the district level. It also talks about the dedicated nodal units by all TSP ministers and the departments who are attached to the state government. And lastly, it talks about the involvement of the local tribal communities to strengthen the planning process. It is as similar as decentralized participation of the people. So the point is, if the demand of Rajasthani tribal population is met, what they will get? They will get the benefit of all these funds, plus they will get better utilization, plus they will get legal extension under the PESA Act 1996. And this is the reason why they are demanding. Out of this, whatever political aspect of the article is there, it is not concerned with the UPSC preparation. With this, now I will leave you to the important question attached to this article. So read the question carefully and answer in the comment box. So let us now move to the last article for the day. This article was published on page 7 of Delhi edition Hindu newspaper and talks about the importance of rising and talks about the menace of rising plastic pollution in Indian economy. Now the question arises, why we need to read this? Well, from prelims perspective, we have to read about the important terms in the news. And the important term which is used in this article is circular economy. So what is the circular economy and how this economy can be utilized in plastic recycling is a matter of this article. The context of the article says that as per the Central Pollution and Control Board, plastic contributes to only 8% of total solid waste, but only 60% of this has been recycled. And because of this poor recycling, what we are observing is that there is an impact on the society as well as on the environment. So it demands that we should move from linear economy of plastic use to the circular economy of plastic use. Now let us see what these are. It simply means that we take a natural resource, we transform the natural resource, we consume it and we dispose it. Let's take an example. We have cut down a tree, we have made a chair out of that wood, we have utilized that chair and now we have burned it out. So the point is, where it is, we have actually disposed it completely. It cannot be recycled, it cannot be used by any other person, it cannot be transformed into any other good. But if we are going for the circular economy, what we will do? We will first of all make a particular product. We will consume it, we will then collect it from the consumer, that is the person who is actually making the product will collect the product when it is out of use. And they will transform the product into the new one and sell it for the reuse. Again, take the example of chair. We have cut down the tree, we have made a chair out of it. Now the chair is not at all used, let's say 30 or 40 years down the line. What we will do, the manufacturer will collect that chair, that wood, he will transform that wood into some other products and sell it to the other consumer. Let's say the arms of the chairs can be used to build stumps for cricket, or the other parts of the chair can be used in order to create small toys or the wooden toys for the children. So this is how a circular economy functions. Now the article says that we should keep our plastic as a part of this circular economy or a central part of this circular economy. Now the question is, what are the actual benefits? The first of all, the most important benefit of circular economy for plastic is environment. It will reduce down the greenhouse emissions which we are producing because of the plastic burning. It will also reduce the plastic pollution of water bodies, especially the healthy rivers in India. It will clear the accumulating landfill space in the urban areas. And lastly, it will reduce the release of harmful gases which can be carcinogenic. when it comes to the economic point of view, where it will reduce the need for feedstock or monomers like naphtha and natural gas. So once a product comes for recycling, there is no need for new raw material in order to produce the same product. It will also help in building the recycling infrastructure, create jobs in the waste sector. When it comes to the social benefit, of course, it will reduce the health hazards because burning of the plastics and plastic pollution can be carcinogenic. It will also reduce the aquatic pollution, which will not only save the life under the water, but also the community or the human population which is dependent on the fishing activity. But there are certain challenges which India is facing right now. The first one being the segregation. India is a country which have this issue that people at their household collect all the garbage, whether it is vegetable and fruit waste, whether it is plastic, whether it is glass, whether it is liquids, everything possible under the same garbage bin. And this is the problem. So this is the real problem. And further, it creates the issue of segregation. We have unorganized and informal mechanical recycling where the practices are not efficient enough to take out the 100% utilization of the used product. We have issues related to the occupational and health safety hazards. So people who are collecting, people who are recycling the plastics do not have enough efficiency in order to work in a safe environment. We also have problem of lack of market-based instrument. Now market-based instrument here means that the person who is creating the plastic product does not have that supply and demand chain in order to buy it back on time. We have limitations on the recycling because technologically India is not as advanced as the European nations. And lastly, we have lack of awareness and behavioral pattern on the part of people. We, the citizens of India, do not have this practice of segregating this solid waste right at our doorsteps. So all these issues have actually demanded considering the benefit of the circular economy to come into practice. The one thing and the important thing which Government of India has done is they have brought plastic waste management rules in 2016. But because of these challenges, these rules have not been implemented in letter and spirit. So in order to bring circular economy of plastic into practice, we have to go for the entire ecosystem, where from manufacturing to selling to reselling, purchasing, recycling, and again putting it into the market requires a dedicated supply chain. With this discussion at place, now I will leave you to the question of the day. So read the question carefully and answer in the comment box.